special guest in today. ¿Qué onda, Jose? How are you?
Hey,
My bad, bro.
it's all good.
I was trying to set all this up, man.
It's all good.
Kids, man, they don't make it easy. They don't make it easy, man.
Yeah,
But we're here, man. We're here.
we're here.
What's up, people? What's up? What's up? What's up?
Oh, and
We're gonna
just
let
good
a
to
few more
be here.
people join in. We're
Absolutely.
gonna get started. We're gonna get started talking about the mind surviving the cage, prison system. So another session of Shed So Many Tears. Welcome, welcome.
Good to be here, brother.
All right. So as you guys have seen the cover to today's session, session 2 of Shed So Many Tears. I go by Brown96. And today we have a special guest, host of Free Aztlan in Oakland, California. He has his radio program with the Revolutionary Radio. And he also has Aztlan Press that he works with. And we got the homie joining in. He's a very educated uh, young man. And he's doing his thing. He's putting that work in when it comes to, that revolutionary work that we all got to tune into because it pertains to all of us. To all of us black and brown and communities of color. With that said, today the session is called The Mind Surviving the Cage. How do so many of our people are able to go into to the prison system and the system itself and are able to come out as a survival. I mean, you're really a survival, you survive that shit and you come out and you start showing your life over, what I mean? And sometimes it's starting from scratch because you're coming out as a totally different person. You know what I mean? And I know a lot of heads that came out and they're just like, it's another world to them, you know what I mean? And we're going to get into that. To some people, they feel, like there's a stigma, not a stigma, but it's like people say all the time that this practice amounts to torture, which it does to a lot. That it's a case by case situation that I read and seen and firsthand experience with friends, and I myself haven't been. I mean, I was locked up, but I didn't spend long amount of time behind bars. But just with my experience, my short term experience within the jails and stuff, I I got a taste of what it is to be behind closed doors and to behind bars and stuff. So, but we're gonna get the camarada Jose Villarreal in. I'm gonna shoot you a talks a lot about it. Uh, hey, how you doing, carnal?
Hey, there you are, brother. Good, good. How are you? Well, thank you for inviting me on your show, brother. I love what you're doing.
Yeah, man.
I also love that the fact that you describe me as a young man, brother. Yeah, I love that.
Hey,
Thank
man.
you. Gracias for that.
You know,
but yeah,
course,
absolutely. But thank you for inviting me, brother.
Está bueno. Sí, yeah. I mean, that's what it is, man. This is a long time coming of me having to make a platform like this because of just things that I've experienced and my will to want to do something in the world, you know what I mean, and make a change, like I think we all have that wanting to change this world in somehow, some way, you know what I mean? But it's like a lot of us don't even understand ourselves to begin with, to even attempt to make a change in this world, you know what I mean? So it's like first you have to find yourself, and in the process of finding yourself, you end up losing yourself, and then you have to re-find yourself. You know what I mean? So it's a whole enredo, bro. It's like it's this whole process that we have to go through as a coming of age. You know what I mean? And but I'm gonna give you the time right now, bro, to give us a brief background of yourself, bro. That way people can get a feel for who we have here on the line.
Yeah, so as you explained, my name is Jose Villarreal, and uh, and by the way, you were spot on when you said that somebody has to kind of discover themselves, and then um, kind of rediscover their new self, because when once you transform, you are no longer your former self. You're now a new person, and with that comes the necessity to, it's kind of like becoming familiar with your, it's like you're a whole new person. You think differently. So you're spot on with that. But I just want to say, I grew up like most people, in the barrios and in the hoods, criminalized at a very early age, you know going back even preteen, you know um and a lot of, there's a lot of experiences that come along with that, from juvenile hall to the boys ranches, CYA, um and in prison, and this is something that, you know there's hundreds of, not thousands of experiences that shape us as we're on this journey. And as you said, some people come out and they, it's a struggle, and there's many obstacles, and that's why we see, we don't see too many formerly incarcerated people contributing, let's say, to the Chicano movement of today, to the movement for social justice in general. People are dealing with a lot of personal obstacles, and coming out, as you said, and you're spot on, brother. I know, even though you've never been there, um, I know that you've talked to enough people who have, for you to have that understanding. You have it, but you know, again, so coming out of that, people are struggling with many different things, and you know and people even who never been to prison, let's say, and we all know, we all have family, we have primos, we have neighbors, we have friends. um just life struggle living in a capitalist society is very difficult, especially for raza, for us, and other oppressed nations people, other colonized people. It's hard enough surviving in this capitalist society, and then put on top of that the fact that somebody was formerly incarcerated, extremely difficult. And this is why we don't see a lot of, because we all know a lot of people who um, are in the concentration camps right now, who have been there before. Um, and we know that there's a lot of guerreros and guerreras in there. We all know. We know, a lot of people who are with the business in there, and they're not for oppression in any form, oppression of their family members, of themselves. They're not going to stand for it. We know that. We know that their heart is 100% fighting oppression, and white supremacy, etc. But so we know that's there. The problem is, then why is there not more people? Because we know many of them out here in this struggle against oppression out here, and against state oppression, colonization, etc. And that's because you know people who come out of there, they are in survival mode. They're attempting to survive, live, to breathe and eat, and there's many obstacles that come with that, job wise, transportation wise, just interacting with people out here, because as we know, it's a whole totally different world in there. There's a lot of things that people are dealing with. So it's very difficult. And so this is why we see very few, um, people out here engaged in the struggle for social justice or for, for Aztlan, for Rasa interests. It's very few. But going back to answer your question, I grew up just like everybody else, in the streets, running the streets and in the neighborhood. I grew up in San Jose, Califaslan, um, and I was caught up very early. I was caught up very early, and you know, um, criminalized at a very early age, where you know I had to survive in there, and so it's a whole different world in there, and one day I'll speak a little bit more on that, but for time's sake today, I will say that, I grew up like so many of us who were criminalized at an early age. And then it was while actually in prison where I began to, study. It was while I was in solitary confinement. And you're right. The title of the show, the mind and surviving the cage, that's very spot on as well, because we know that these control units, and we like to call them concentration camps, are actually designed to destroy the minds of the people that they send there. And this is the state making this decision to handpick, to cherry pick certain individuals um, of different backgrounds, mostly Chicano people. Um, and by the way, when I was in the S.H.U, I'll note that it was 80%, 84% Chicano populated. So for, there's 1,000 people. What's 80 per, actually there was, I believe, 1,115 or something people when I was there. Um, and of these 1,100 people, 84% means there was something like over 800 Chicano prisoners out of 1,100 that were held there. So why is that? Why, that's a big question that when I was there, I began to, think about and grapple with the question, why? Why is so many raza here? When we know that raza ain't doing nothing different than white prisoners, black prisoners, Asian prisoners. Raza prisoners are doing nothing different than any other prisoners. Why is it that, why is it that 800 of us are in there, and, they have 100 whites, 100 blacks, 100 Asian, 100 these other nationalities, but raza are over 800. Why? And so I ended up writing an article on that. The viewers can check it out at prisons.org. And, it was about this fact of, and I called it the new greaser laws. Because as we know in history, there was the greaser laws. They were really actually called the foreign miners tax laws. But the white nation, the white community referred to them as the greaser laws, because at the time the word greaser was a derogatory term for Chicano Mexicano people. So I wrote this piece called The New Greaser Laws. And you can find it on prisons.org or poormagazine.org as well. And it addressed this. But so this is, where I began to look at my understanding after a life of criminalization of, lumpen activity, what they refer to as lumpen, which is basically, street elements, people in the barrio, in the hood. The political term for that is the lumpen. So after a lifetime of this activity, I began to really, to really look at my social reality and that of other raza around me, of what we were experiencing. Why were we suffering this oppression when we're the same? And I started to really, look into this. I also joined a political study group, um, and we did it through correspondence. And it was through an organization called MIM, the Maoist Internationalist Movement for Prisons. And this organization, conducted these political study groups. I joined them, and and I'll get more into that later. But I'm just taking you through, how I became here talking with you on this show after this life of crime, criminalization, crimes against the people, I should say, because it is criminal and it has been ruled that holding people in solitary confinement is illegal for long periods of time. And so it was a crime. And, after all of this, I, began to learn. And, I was, released and, launched Aztlan Press. Um, while in prison, I should mention that I participated in the study group, and then we ended up publishing this book as a result, Chicano Power and the Struggle for Aztlan. Beautiful book. You could find it on any search engine or what have you. And then when released with Aztlan Press, I published my artwork in this one, Aztlan Realism, Chicano Revolutionary Art from Pelican Bay S.H.U. So these are two books. You can find them online, Google them, whatever. But so these are the programs that I helped launch. Some of the programs that I helped launch upon release, and I just dove into it out here, and I continued with this struggle for justice, and not forgetting those sisters and brothers behind enemy lines that continue to be in the concentration camps. And I got the radio show now, Free Aztlan, as well, where I began to, focus on the Chicano nation, the community, our community, but also, having a strong emphasis on, our loved ones in the prisons, and so this is like a little bit of background of where I went through, what I went through, and how I got here today.
Okay. No, thank you for that, man. Appreciate that. Now, let's travel back, though, because there is always a beginning to any type of, any lifestyle is a lifestyle, and it becomes a lifestyle for many different reasons. Now, what was your setting when you were younger? Like, what led you to this path? Because we all need some kind of guidance and stuff. And if there isn't any, or there is, and that influence is the wrong influence, the wrong type of guidance, then it just depends. I guess it depends on the person, how that person takes that information and translates it into their own life, right? In their own lifestyle. Now,
Absolutely.
the way I notice about certain things, about certain people, that we don't understand the process of having to deal with traumas, having to deal with things that we weren't supposed to be exposed to at an early age. And with that, we either turn it into some kind of energy form that we can change that for the better, or we turn that into anger that is released back into the streets. Now, this process of soothing is what I believe is the process of what we're lacking in Black and brown communities, that no one is teaching us, not the school, at home. Parents didn't even get taught it, so how can they teach something that they were never taught? And it's an ongoing thing that these kids that grew up around situations that are dangerous, violence, fortunately, a lot of, gang activity and all that stuff that contributed to why a lot of our brown men are in prison have lowered quite a bit. But I'm referring to back when we were kids, back when you were, a youngster. there was a lot of that violence going on. And who was there to help us soothe ourselves through all this trauma? So we basically bottled it in, and then that turned into anxiety, and that anxiety that turned into, at any moment you can just blow up, and that was like a constant fight or flight, you know, mode. We were constantly on flight or fight. You know what I mean? And that creates more of a tumbleweed into further damage, causing onto ourselves and to the community. So, like, what was your setting, bro, when you were younger?
Well, my setting, I mean, I think most those who have been, you know, um, formerly incarcerated, and I've had a lot of roommates in there. We talk and we, talk about our childhood and stuff like this, and tell stories about what happened here and there and what have you. And what I noticed is that, and you're absolutely right about the trauma. You're on point, brother. I mean, 100%. And almost every roommate that I had the same. It's the same pattern, and most most people within the prison systems, um, you know, come from, in political terms, this is the lumpen population. And what I mean by that is this is the street elements, those considered they so-called quote unquote gang members, those who um, live off the underground economy, meaning they don't pay taxes to the state. They survive. Most don't work. They survive by other means. And these are the populations that fill the prison system. So the majority of the people, and myself included, you asked me about myself. I come from a background of of my family being criminalized. My whole family being criminalized. Parents being criminalized, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, many different cousins, the whole family. It's almost like, you're growing up here in this certain area, what have you. It's normal, it's normal. When you walk down the street, and you're on point again, you know, growing up in the 90s, this is when I began to, in the 80s, actually beginning to be criminalized, 80s and 90s. It was very normal to walk down the street, and you couldn't walk down the street without the pigs throwing you against the wall. Where are you going, searching, having you sit on the curb for an hour. This is like a every other day, every few days. You and your friends, you might be going to the park, get down or what have you. And then there was a lot of horizontal crime as well. Horizontal crime, that's, referring to brown on brown crime, raza on raza, and there was a lot of brown on brown crime, horizontal crime, meaning, with other raza. So, this, behavior, again, you pointed out that many times when people suffer trauma, oftentimes they will release it on those closest to them, or those they are most familiar with, those in their communities. And this is what we have historically been doing. I would say since colonization began in 1848. We began when the first barrios began to form. This is what we did. So, um, this is the type of stuff that we begin to learn, some of us, and try to heal from. But trauma, going back to trauma, growing up like this, when being criminalized is normal. you're going to go through a lot of different situations, and be exposed to a lot of different, things that happen growing up from a baby on up. And this is normal. All of this kind of stuff, everything that you can think of involving street life, was very normal. I grew up and it was normal. My neighbors were the same. All of my friends, I never had friends who weren't targeted by the pigs, who weren't targeted by the police, who weren't, criminalized. Every one of my friends was. And and I've spoken about this before, where um what this hyper policing is actually national oppression, because we're a group of kids, 11, 12, 13 years old, a group of 5 or 6 of us walk into the park. This is where we hang out. This is where we play basketball or handball, or just hang out and talk and do what kids do, on bikes or skateboard, whatever it is. And yet, because we're raza, because we're Chicano youth, the police would stop us because of the neighborhood that we're in, pull us over because there's a group of, more than 3 of us. And this is what they consider a quote unquote gang, more than 3 people. And say that, what are we doing here? So these are some of the things that, growing up, just being exposed to this, repression, being exposed to different, activities, street life activities, violence, being exposed to all of these different, forms of, struggles and resistance and oppression, and within the community and externally, coming into the, and dealing with all of this stuff. I think that growing up like this, but then you're right again. I We do make personal choices as well. So even though we may be growing up in a community that's, plagued with, with violence and, other activities, even though we grow up in this neighborhood, and even though maybe our family may be themselves criminalized, those who are, you know, um, those who are responsible for teaching you from being a child to an adult, if they themselves have been criminalized, um, and as you said, we don't learn, our parents don't learn, nobody learns how to deal with trauma. So if they were exposed to trauma and we are growing up, how can they teach us to deal with trauma in a good way when they themselves never learned, and they themselves perhaps cannot deal with it in a right way themselves? So, this is a situation. However, we do still make personal choices. And I do know many people who grew up in this environment and did not, and I think it goes back to our personalities as well. I think he hinted at that a little bit, where, me and you can be exposed to the same treatment in a restaurant or in a store. And let's throw somebody else in there as well. 3 of us walk into a mall, and, there's a white supremacist who, you know, calls us a derogatory name in our face. All 3 of us are going to react differently, possibly. We might react the same, we might react differently, um, even when it comes to, this white supremacist or what have you, putting hands, just grabbing some, putting hands on one of us, we're probably going to react differently as well. Some people would be like, hey, you do that again, I'm going to, give it to you. Or some people won't even tell them that. They just give it to them. Everybody reacts differently. And the same goes for trauma and growing up in these environments that are plagued with, either pig repression, police repression on our community, or horizontal crime, our own communities going at it, and different survival groups going at it with each other. So we all react differently. One of my siblings grew up in the same household, um, and was not criminalized, and went on to become educated and got a couple of degrees, and you know lived a totally different life. And so and again, I also know people in incarcerated who they grew up with both parents in the household. They grew up very, you know, from well off families, and dad had a business, and they, the whole both parents graduated college, had master's degrees or what have you, and yet they ended up in the same place as me. So our environment does factor into what we do, but we also have personal choices, and we react to violence differently. We react to repression and oppression differently. Some people will tell somebody, hey, don't talk to me like that, or give them a warning. Some people don't give a warning, and I tended to just react more than and so I ended up in different predicaments. But we all react differently, and this is the environment. I think, again, I want to talk about trauma. Very important topic, brother, because growing up, I never, now I know about trauma. Now I have began to look into the effects of trauma, the beginnings, why, how to deal with stuff. And the thing about trauma is, scientists have examined DNA, and it's a fact that DNA is even affected by trauma. If I'm suffering trauma, it's going to be in it affects my DNA. And then if a woman and a man, if they have a baby and they both suffered trauma, it's a fact, it's scientific, that trauma will transfer into the baby's DNA. And we don't know, it hasn't been studied long enough to know how many generations does this trauma last before it's out. We don't know that, but we do know that DNA, going down to DNA, is affected by trauma. So, that just, as you said, our parents and our grandparents never learned to deal with. Now, going back to colonization in 1848, when the U.S. came and took this land that we stand on, that we call Aztlan, that's a traumatic experience. All raza living here under white supremacy, who, they had towns called sundown towns, where if you were a raza in the quote unquote Southwest, and you were caught outside your house past sundown, they would lynch you. They would, a lot of bad things would happen. So going back to, 1848, um, you know, our descendants that were here, or even in Mexico, suffering trauma there, coming here, no matter where our descendants, our ancestors come from, if they're suffering a certain kind of trauma, every generation that's born is going to have that, be affected by it. And as you said, they can't deal with it. Grandparents can't deal with it. Parents can't deal with it. And then it comes on our plate. And then we're born into this, environment where, it's a what they call an economically depressed neighborhood. Not a lot of resources, very poor community, barrios, hoods, what have you, projects. We're in this environment where everybody's trying to survive. How can you survive when you're in a situation like that, living in this type of environment, with no resources at all, nothing? You're going to survive by any means possible. And as you said, more than likely, it's going to be at the expense of those closest to us, our neighbors, people down the street, other raza. So, this is, I think that this is, this is what, my early forms of trauma growing up in this, in a, in a situation where my whole family had been criminalized. And and that opens a door for the, conversation about criminalization in general as well. Criminalization, where does it come from? Why is raza hyper police? Why is there more criminalization in our communities than in, let's say, white communities? Why is that? That's a question that we have to examine as well. And it'll always go back to national oppression, where, here, we're here, land taken. Now we have to, fall under this new government or what have you. And so this, white supremacy and national oppression, this, you know, results in mass incarceration, hyper policing the community. So we can't, it's on the one hand, we have choices. On the other hand, we can't blame ourselves for a situation as well that, we're in these economically depressed neighborhoods, communities that are not getting funded or sourced, and, all of this stuff. And then hyper policed when we're trying to survive, trying to eat, trying to, go home and feed our families and siblings. I mean, so, we have to take accountability for our decisions. At the same time, we have to understand what placed us in this situation where we have to make such decisions. And I also say that, while I was incarcerated, I remember reading something where I forgot who said it. It was actually a professor, some professor. I got to look it up later now. But a professor had said, um, the most logical action, and this is a professor, I think a professor of philosophy, no, psychology, and I'll look him up. But he said the most, for those who commit crimes and who are in these dire circumstances, these, really, really horrible situations, they can't eat, they barely have a place to live, and they're in this situation. The most logical answer in that type of situation, he said, is crime. He said the most logical, because you got to remember, first and foremost, for any species, I won't even say human beings, for a dog, for a cat, for any animal, including human beings, the first and foremost, you have to survive. You have to survive. And if you're put in a situation where you gotta breathe, you gotta eat, the most logical thing is you're going to do it by any means possible. So I'm not saying, I'm not condoning the certain activities or what have you. I'm just saying that, even a professor, some psychology professor, what have you, had said, like, yay, the most logical action when you're in a dire situation is crime. Hey, and then it opens up the conversation to crime itself. We got to remember that just because something's a law, something's a crime, doesn't mean it's morally right. Just because it's a crime doesn't mean that it's, morally right to follow that law. Sometimes it's morally right to break that law. And what I mean by that is, if we go back to history here in the US, and we could go back to, let's say, the days of slavery. At one point here in the US, enslaving human beings was legal. That was a law. If you tried to free a slave, like, oh, hell no, you got a human being shackled up and, whipping them all day to work in the fields for 20 hours a day, hell no, that's wrong. I'm letting them go. That was a crime. So we can't get stuck on, we have to follow the law because it's a crime if we, Wait a minute. It depends what you're talking about. There's a lot of things that are crimes that, you know, by breaking that law, you're committing a moral action. We could go back to Germany, Hitler's Germany. It was law. It was legal for them to put other human beings in the oven of Jewish descent. If somebody were to help a Jewish person escape death, they would be committing a crime. So we got to remember, we can't get stuck on this is a law. We don't want to commit. Wait a minute. Who's saying it's a crime? How is it a crime? Who is it a crime against? And so there's always a moral issue. This is why many people have in history have dodged the draft when they're drafted into the military. You have religious people, you have priests and nuns who have chained themselves to the fences of nuclear, compounds and been taken to jail and prison. And they've done this because even though some things are law and they're legal, to follow that law is morally wrong. So we have to always, we have to think deeply into this. And so backing up, growing up in this environment where, crime, what they consider crime is normal, trying to eat by any means necessary, trying to survive, trying to keep the electricity on by any means necessary. You know, we have to think what's morally wrong. Under a capitalist system, it's a crime in some cases, and we could look this up. It's a crime to feed the homeless. If I set up a table and I'm feeding the homeless, the police will come and say, "You got to take that table out. That's against the law. I could, send you to jail for it." So again, what the crime is irrelevant. What is morally right? So, if I'm growing up in a situation where I have to eat, or somebody is promoting violence on me or somebody in my family or my neighbors or my loved ones, what am I going to do? Am I going to protect them? That's morally right. You're not, as you talked about your children, brother. You're not going to allow somebody to come and hurt your children in any way, right? That's a moral. Who cares about the crime? Somebody comes trying to, you got to stop that by any means necessary. And so that's a moral question. This is where I talk about this. This is what I'm talking about. A moral question, not the crime. So growing up like this, as I said, our neighborhoods are hyper policed. We're always arrested for crimes. But what really is a crime? What is more? So this is the kind of environment that I came from. Surviving at any cost by any means. Growing up, a family who was criminalized and neighbors and community. A community that was hyper policed and still is in some cases. So, and so this is kind of where that kind of trauma comes from. Growing up like that, almost like you're under a police state, like you're, living in a military compound, and then, the criminalization that kind of fosters the increasing of trauma within myself as well. So this is a lot of stuff that that occurred that brought me to the situation where I'm at now.
Yeah. Now let me ask you this, bro, because I ask myself this a lot, bro. Like, would the living in a different location, would that have mattered to your outcome? Also, what do you think was missing in your household for you to have had more of a advantage as to understand reality and understand outcomes as you make choices? What was the one thing that could have prevented you from going down this path that was missing at home?
I mean, I was raised by a single mother who had to work, so was not home. And so, I had a grandmother who was there. But growing up, I just, you know, and so maybe, I believe that the economic pressure, at least in my case, I believe, of having to have, you know, um, a father who's incarcerated, so he's not there. A mother who had to work, so she's not there. And I think so. The parents being home, but how can they be home even today? How can both parents have to work? And if it's a mother, a single mother, nobody's going to watch your children. Nobody's going to ensure those children are not running the street or not doing this, not doing it. Nobody's going to do that like a mother or father. Nobody. Our tios and tias and and primos and they love us. But nobody's gonna be honest like and that's why a lot of people, you want to, I want to go to Theo's house. I want to go. Why? Because they let them run wild, or they let them do this or that, and they love them. They're showing them love, but only the parents are gonna be on their bumpers, like, go do this, go do. No, you are not going out. No, you want to spend a night where? Get in that damn room. So nobody's gonna be on the children like the parents. So, I think that maybe, you know, on the surface, I would say, okay, if both my parents were home, there, maybe I would have. Now, that's on the surface. And yet the real reason why weren't my parents there? Why was my father, criminalized? And why did my mother
How old were you, bro?
When what?
When your father got incarcerated?
Oh, he got incarcerated when I was 6 months old.
Yeah. Oh, okay, you were okay.
Yeah, so I was like a baby, and he didn't get out till, I was almost 10. So, I mean, and why? So we got to go back to, okay, why was he and so many others criminalized? The same reason we're criminalized today. Growing up in these barrios, because if we would grow up in another barrio, we would probably not be criminalized if we attempted to assimilate into the community that we're growing up in. And that's another conversation that I'll get a little bit into after. But going back to my mother, a single mom having to work, not in the house. So nobody's there to say, hey, she's working. Grandma's taking care of us. Hey, we're going to go over here. We're going to go to the store. Okay. Instead of going to the store, we're going to the park, And so going back, so why do mothers, single mothers, have to work and not be able to be home with the child? Why is that? You would think that morally, because there's some societies where single mothers can stay home and they do have free health care and they do have resources and they do have housing that's provided to them by the government. There's societies like that. They're usually socialist societies that do ensure there's housing, there's health care for all. So single mothers, they in that position where they have this pressure of, I got to pay the rent, the electricity, buy the food, the clothes, keep the car, insurance, gas, everything on my paycheck. There's societies that mothers don't have to do that. Under capitalism, if you don't have money, you don't eat. You don't, you'll be under a bridge. They don't care. So so on the surface, as I said, I would say the short answer on the surface, well, if I had both, if I grew up where parents were both in the home, able to, at least before I went to school, and then as soon as I get out of school, maybe things would have turned out different. However, That's the surface answer. The deeper answer is why do single mothers have to work? That's the problem. And that goes back to capitalism, because we live in a society where they don't care if you're a single mother and you have 8 children. They don't care. You don't have money, you're not eating, your kids ain't eating. You guys can all go under a bridge. So single mothers have to, and then children are there, and and so this is that's that answer to that question. You asked another question about if I would have grown up in a different area.
Yeah.
What do I think it would turn? And actually, it's I would have to say yes and no. I would say, I say no because actually the first time that I was incarcerated, it was because I was taken out of my community with my local neighborhood school, and they did this thing where they took a bunch of us, put us on school buses, shipped us out to the white community, the very nice affluent area, and shipped us over there to go to school there. And that was the first time while I was in that school. It was probably 90% white. A lot of these children, my classmates, I would speak to them and they would say their fathers are lawyers, doctors, this kind of community. I'm coming from a community where everybody's parents been to prison or on probation or, what have you, going to this community where they're picking their children up in Mercedes and my father's a lawyer and all this type of stuff. Totally different situation. I ended up, writing my name on a chair, and they called the police. They placed me in juvenile hall for vandalism, for writing my name on a chair. That's when I was first entrapped and put on probation, which lasted the rest of my life, almost, up until now. Now, I'll just say this. That's why I say no, because had I done the same action in the school in the barrio, what you got, clean that up. They would have probably, you got detention, not even that. Like, hey, here's a rag, clean that shit up, and keep it moving. Because I was in this white community, a simple act that in my own community, they would have said, hey, why are you doing that? Get this right, clean that shit up and keep it. But because I was here in this, other community, they called the police, had me incarcerated, and so that's why I say no. If I was in another, but you gotta remember, there's national struggles and there's class struggles. There's economic struggles. So there's brown and black people that grow up in these affluent communities and they're fine. They're almost never harassed or hyper policed or, police drive by them and wave at them, because they're existing in a different affluent, wealthy neighborhood. So they have this class privilege. Economically, they're in a different category. So, and also they have already attempted, or in some cases assimilated, with this different class environment. And so I believe that had somebody grown up like that in this different area, affluent community, absolutely their life experiences will almost always be different. And so had I been born into this class privilege, I think it would have been different. Absolutely. It would have been different. I would have, grown up, attempting to assimilate into this, other community. And so I would have been, but if I were to move right now or as a teenager into that.
Yeah,
I'm
that's too
still
late.
getting it. I'm still getting harassed. I'm still
Yeah.
getting get. What are you doing? Still in over here? Get your ass out of here. Go back to So that's why I say
Yeah.
yes or no, because it
Yeah.
depends. If you already have taken on the culture or cultura of Chica, being from the Chicano nation, being a Chicano, doesn't mean that we have to be doing crazy things. I'm just saying that when you look at me, if you can say, "Oh yeah, he's a Chicano," like you can tell because of the cultural behavior that I have
Mhm.
adopted. This is my culture. Now, I would stick out like a sore thumb going to these affluent communities, and so I would still get it. But had I been born into there, with the different circle class of friends and different economically, yeah, I would probably be okay, because this is why we see black and brown people growing up in and they blend right in, because they've taken on the culture of this other class privileged community. So yeah,
Mhm.
so absolutely.
Thank you for that, bro.
Yeah.
Appreciate that, man. That makes it clear as to when people wonder, I wonder how things would have been if it would have turned out this way, if it would have been that way. But you know what? Breaking it down like that, it does make sense why some people thrive more on certain places than others, because there's a whole lot of elements that go into living situations and just areas of different areas within that same city. You know what I mean? Just it can be a
Absolutely.
different world just across the town. You know what I mean? So it's just
Absolutely.
that makes sense, bro. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
See now, everyone has a blueprint of what it is to be a man, what it is to be a male, right? And if a person that's growing up, a kid growing up, that never gets to see a blueprint of what it is to be, what it is to be a passionate man, what it is to be a man that what's it called, disciplines, when it comes to relationships, someone that's modeling that, then that individual, that kid growing up, finds it in other places, in other men, in other people, right? And a lot of the times, these people that this kid seeks is not always the best influence. What would you say in your circumstance was where you looked for that in other people? First of all, what were you aware that you were missing this within you? And if so, what was the steps you took to find this? What it is to be a man? What it is to be, what I mean, a model for you as growing up?
Absolutely. Well, I think that, of course, I don't think that people know certain things are missing. Um,
Mm,
I don't think that I knew anything was missing. You know, and I said this before. It's like, if I read this before too, that you don't growing up, you don't know you're poor, because everybody around you
mm,
poor. It's normal. Like, poor? I'm
mm,
not poor.
yeah.
Like, what do you mean you're not poor? You're eating that government cheese. How are you not poor? So, you know, I mean, so
Yeah.
you don't even know that you're poor. You don't know. And
Yeah.
then going
Mm,
to, I think about Asada Shakur. This sister
mm,
Asada Shakur said, the same thing. She said, oppressed people don't know they're oppressed, just like poor
mm,
people don't know they're poor. Oppressed people don't know they're oppressed. And she said the first step um, toward liberation is you have to teach people that they're oppressed.
mm,
Because, and you think about that, it's deep, because nobody's going to struggle against oppression unless they understand they are oppressed. If you don't feel you're oppressed,
mm,
you'll be like, it's all good. I get
mhm,
to go to,
mhm.
McDonald's every day. I'm good. I got my, my little Big Mac or whatever. I don't know what. I could go to the mall. I could buy any pair of Jordans up. As long as these little things are covered, people are like, what do you mean I'm oppressed? Like, I'm good. And it's the same thing with being poor. People don't realize it. So you have to show them and teach them that you're actually poor. Like, let me break it down to you. And so the same thing is done with oppression. We don't realize that we're oppressed. And then when they're saying that, you're saying, well, wait a minute. Don't you know this land that we stand on is ours, that's been stolen? So you have to teach people that they are oppressed and colonized. But going back to your question, just like people don't know they're poor, people don't know they're oppressed, people don't know that they're lacking in certain emotional stabilities, or being lacking in role models. They don't know that. People, they have to be taught that. So of course I didn't know that the only kind of role model were people in survival mode. I never knew that. Of course I didn't. How could I? Now, I would say that, of course, myself, and I would say most people, if not everybody, when they do lack certain forms of guidance, or the inability to model an appropriate response to different, as you said, discipline, relationship stuff, all of this stuff, when that's lacking in your life, in order to be able to model it, and take on these qualities and these principles, we do look toward you know the first thing that's around us, in the streets, in our community. And as you said, when we live in communities that are in survival mode, they're doing, by any means necessary, whatever it takes to survive. And when they're living like this, then of course, and that's the surface, because everything that we talk about has a surface answer, quick one, but then it goes really deep. The surface is, of course, that we look for people in our community, and most people that the youth looks up to, are committing predatory acts in many cases. Let's keep it real, right? They're committing acts that, wait a minute, this is our community. This is horizontal crimes, preying on other raza, or what have you. Now, when this happens, that's the surface. Of course that happens, and we look up to these people who are making money by the underground economy, let's just say. And they have a lot of material items that, we think that that's the proper guy. That's the person we want to model. The person who has lots of stuff, has, money, women, and all of these things that, when you're in the barrio, on the streets, these are the things that you want to acquire and you chase. That's the short answer, the surface answer. Now, digging deeper, we have to remember that, because we live in a capitalist society, brother, we live in a capitalist society. Because of that, the culture that we're raised in, whether it's media, watching movies, watching cartoons, they're promoting capitalism. The cartoons, they're having a trunk full of shoes, and they're running over here. They're promoting the idea of accumulation of goods, of this capitalist culture. And we see it from we're babies, and then we go to school, and we're it's promoted everywhere we go. So because of that, then the hero in our neighborhood, the hero, as you said, that we want to model and aspire to, are wannabe capitalists. And these are people, they want to get rich, and they want to drive $100,000 cars, and wear mink coats, and the $500 shoes, and gold watches, and all this. They want to do all this. They're aspiring capitalists. They're wannabe capitalists. So when we're growing up, we see the guy with all these cars, and these gold chains and all this stuff, and all this money, pulling out wads of money, and we want to, and we want to be this. We want to be, growing up, a wannabe capitalist as well. So if we go now, and that's because of the society we live here in the U.S., it's a capitalist country society. That's what it runs on. Now, if we were to go to a revolutionary country, and I love using the example of Cuba because it's so close, people know it, and it's still struggling forward on the revolutionary path. It's not perfect. It needs, but it's moving forward. Now, if we go to Cuba, we don't see the youth aspiring to be the person in the neighborhood who hurts people. In the barrios, in the projects, whoever got the most bodies, that's who we would, people look up to that person. This is a bad motherfucker, excuse my language, but this fool has 3-4 bodies. He's and so we look up to people who harm people. We up to people who acquire things, in ways that harm people as well. And they got, 10 cars, and, they got gold chains and everything, and all this, these $1,000 shoes or what have you. And we look up to them, even though they are engaging in this self-destructive behavior and behavior that harms raza and community as well. So, but when we go to revolutionary countries, the youth there aspire, like in Cuba, they aspire to be like Che Guevara. They teach them in the schools. It's like opposite than here. They teach them in the schools who Che Guevara was, what he did, how he would spend his weekends, volunteering his labor, for the country, building the nation, how he went to other countries and helped them liberate other countries, wasn't even paid for it. He did it. He felt this is the moral obligation that he had to take his experience and help other oppressed people around the world. Selflessness. This is what people in revolutionary countries aspire to. So, again, we have the short answer. When you don't have proper role models or what have you, people to model, you go, you look in the street, and these are people oftentimes who hurt people. They got 3-4 bodies. These are people who have come up on, financial situation in ways that harm others. And, they got 10 cars, and they throw barbecues for the whole hood. And, they hook everybody up with other things, and they do this. And, and these are, but when we go to revolutionary countries, people are aspiring to be like these revolutionary heroes, Che Guevara, etc. So again, it goes back to the society. What's being poured into our communities, in our schools? Is it promoting selfishness, capitalism, exploitation? Hey, go out and get it. If you don't got money, you ain't eating. And every man for himself. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. All of these sayings and slogans and ideas that are promoted in the TV and the movies and the magazines, etc., in the schools, are all capitalist based, capitalist propaganda. And this is why people grow up selfish. Everything's for sale. Everything's for sale here. And so, in the US, and I mean everything, but in these revolutionary countries, they pour all of their resources into the youth, and they teach them a different kind of morals and principles where selflessness is what they aspire to. Being a hero is not hurting, your own community. Being a hero is helping others free themselves from oppression. So again, it gets really deep. It depends what country and society we're in. Here, I look to the streets like most of us, but that's because of the society we live in. This is what we have to aspire to, and yeah.
Yeah, man. Oh, man, for sure, man. I've been working for the school system for about going 10 years. I started working like in 2012, around there. So I've seen a lot of stuff, bro, within the system, like the school system, and is ran a lot like a correctional facility.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and it's a shame that the districts look more for the funding than for what's right for the kids, right? And I'm talking about what they feed these kids. I'm talking about how the curriculum is run, and all it just in all aspects of the system of the school, right? It's it seems like it's all they're focused more on what on the budget and all that, on the money, right? Now, when it goes to the kids and how some of these teachers even see these kids, I've I've heard like in the staff lounge and stuff, some teachers even talking about, oh, that kid he's gonna end up in prison. Like that's the type of kid that's gonna end up in prison. So it's like already they're giving these kids like the labels, like and this is carried on in their cumes. I'm more than sure that there's notes that get passed on, even if the kid goes to a different school, the cume follows right along with that kid. Wow. So it's just like a prison. It's just like being in the being, like you said, criminalized already, labeled as such. Now with this said, because I do want to gradually go into the process of you being criminalized and being in the system, and the thing is that a lot of the times we subconsciously, we even don't even think about it, but we right away, when someone's not behaving like a kid or whatever, you right away remember, oh, that kid, like, I mean, if you have children, you know who not to leave them around because they're bad influences, right? So just in that perspective, the world treats people like that growing up. Nope, don't hang out with that kid. That kid's no good. That kid's bad news, And that, that individual keeps hearing these things over and over, you know what I mean? They hear little whispers here, little talk here, teachers telling them, you're no good. At home, the parents probably telling them, fuck, dude, you're going to end up in jail. You're going to, everyone, the whole world is telling them, you're no good. So this constant chatter in that individual's mind is like, even though they're trying to be a good kid, I mean, what kid, it's just how they're molding that kid to be, right? That kid just needs a little guidance or whatnot. But I want to get to how your mind was going when you were going into schools, and how you perceived the school system, and was there anyone that was trying to give you guidance in the schools that you remember? And did you actually listen to it, or did that just go from one ear to the other?
Well, the best teachers that I had, I remember in the school system, I would have to say were the Chicano teachers that I had. Chicano teachers. And I think that, it's not that the other teachers, it's not that they, I would say, set out to be, bad or mistreat me, what have you. I don't think that's the case. They just don't understand. I mean, how can you understand? It's very difficult for one culture to understand another unless you have studied this other culture intensely, which nobody does. We don't. Nobody spends years studying. For example, Cambodian history and culture and food, and nobody does that. We have neighbors or what have you that are different nationalities. We interact with them, and that's that. Teachers are no different. It's very rare that, and there are some, I won't say all, but it's very rare for, let's say, a white teacher to study deeply Chicano culture, Chicano history, the whole everything about it. And even if they did, they're still not gonna fully understand, like, and so and it's the same, but it's the same with, let's say, a Chicano teacher and the black culture. Very, very rare that a Chicano teacher is going to study for decades the black nation and their culture and black, lingo and their everything about their food and how they react. They're not, I mean, no. So this is what I mean by, I was talking to somebody before, and we're talking about, in history they had something called you know um, segregation, right? And today some would say that our schools are kind of segregated because um, some schools I know, like in Oakland, and a lot of schools don't even have pencils. They don't even have school books. Like, they have, one school book for every three students, and they have to share it. They don't even have, the teachers have to buy the pencils, the erasers for their, they buy them out of their own money because the school. And so this is because money and resources are not poured into brown and black communities. And they use a lot of different, tax and this and that. They can use any name and any excuse they want. Bottom line, brown and black schools are not funded like white schools. Period. Point blank. Period. And as I said, they can name any kind of excuse why that is. It doesn't matter. They're not funded like white schools. And when I say white, I'm talking about, more affluent schools, the more richer areas, neighborhoods. Now, I would say that because of that, um, you know, there is a lopsidedness that goes into the schools. But back to the segregation thing. I was talking to somebody and we're talking about segregation, and before, there was segregation and, brown kids here, black kids, white kid, what have you. And somebody was like, yeah, I'm glad that segregation's not here no more. And I said, you know what? I'm all for segregation. I'm all for it. However, I'm not just for segregation as it was in the 1940s and 30s and 20s here in the US, just segregation where we're separated with no resources. I'm for segregation where we control our own resources. Put us in an area where it's Chicano people, but we're in control of our own resources and economy for our area. I'm for that kind of segregation. Yeah, hell yeah. I could be taught by Chicano teachers, but not only that, we have our own economy. Like what happened here in the US when they say segregation was only segregation in the physical sense, but white control of the economy, the land, the resources, the legal system. That's not segregation. I'm talking about segregation. Hell yeah, I'd want, our own cities and states and countries and economies, and also control of the land, resources, laws, courts, everything. Because, nobody knows black people like black people. Nobody knows Chicano people like Chicano people, raza. We know our people. When it comes to the schools, back to your question, nobody knows the Chicano student like the Chicano teacher. This teacher either came from this same barrio or neighborhood or community, or came from one just like it, or has a strong understanding of it. This is our culture. We know our people, our nation. So, I think that when I was growing up, as I said, once I was criminalized, that was because they put me in like a 90% white school. The teachers, I don't think there was not one Chicano teacher there when I was there. So my teachers were white. And so, and I'm not saying that there's not white teachers who, there's some white teachers that really do, um, you know, pour time and attention to Chicano, brown, and black students. Absolutely. I'm saying the school I was at, it didn't happen. It didn't happen there. And, the teachers that I remember that did that and really helped to nurture, certain areas that I was really into in school, were the Chicano teachers, and this is why I'm a firm believer that, we should have our own schools. We should have Chicano schools. We should have Chicano teachers. We should have all of these things because we understand our kids, our youth. We know the struggles they're going through. Um, when a child is, you know, absent from school a lot, we understand our community. We understand what the struggles are when a child is going to school and hasn't ate or can't eat lunch. We understand these things. We know how to react to it. We know how to help that child, how to encourage them to come early or, and find ways to help. We could do all that because we know our people. And so, yeah, so going back to your question, I would say before I was criminalized in different schools that I was in, I did have very good teachers, and I love some of my teachers. I loved them like family, and these were always Chicano teachers who really, gave extra attention and helped to me to understand different things in schools. And it was only when I was taken out of that environment and sent to, the mostly white school is when um, I had big problems with the teacher, and they called the police on me. But my phone's about to die, brother. I love this. You got to have me back on again because we need to continue this conversation. But my battery's gonna go out right now, bro.
All right, man. Yeah, this is a be part one, man.
Oh,
continue with part
absolutely.
2 in the near future, man. But I appreciate this, man. I appreciate it a lot. This is a lot of what we need to discuss. You know what I mean? As for what can keep our youngsters away from this type of chain. You know what I mean? That we a lot, like you said, a lot of our brown and black family households, they don't have the resources to break that chain. They don't even realize that they're within a chain, and that's the worst part when they don't realize it. Just like you said, when you don't realize that you're poor, because everyone around you is in the same circumstance. How can you break it? How can you know any better? But I appreciate this, man.
And I would say, brother, I'll just add to this, like in this conversation, we're talking about role models and what have you. And even though we live in a capitalist country and what have you, and the role models that our youth have are maybe engaging in behavior that may not be the best behavior that we want our kids to model. However, there are many conscious Chicano people, even here in this society, even under capital, there's a lot of conscious Chicano people. And I would say that, just like for me, living this certain lifestyle and then, transforming myself in my understanding, was through political education. I would say that the best way to transform our youth, instead of them aspiring to be like wannabe capitalists or people who, are harming our community or doing things that are not good for our community, in order to steer our youth away from self-destructive behavior and aspiring to wannabe capitalists, I would say direct our youth to conscious Chicano people who came from their barrios, from their neighborhoods, from their lifestyle, from their background, who are not necessarily pushing some religious, get on your knees and say these words 100 times and you'll be no. I'm talking about people who come from their barrio, from their neighborhood, from their background, who are talking to them about real life choices under real life circumstances here in the US, and understanding our history, what we are dealing with, and why it's important to not engage in self destructive behavior, but to help your community. And I think the key to transformation in our youth, in brown and black youth, and all oppressed youth, is linking up our youth to those who are conscious, who came from their, from their, and that's, I think, is going to be the key, because our youth are not stupid. They're not going to listen to somebody who ain't even from their community. Not only that, they're not going to listen to somebody who is pushing some kind of ideology that they see as weak, or as, this guy, he they want to hear it from somebody who's been there, somebody who they respect, and somebody who's teaching them something they don't know. That's who they want to, and so that's the key, is linking. And I think that those who work with children and youth have to link them with community members who are, who do come from their backgrounds, who have been, transformed in, with political consciousness, and that's the key, in my opinion. But all right, brother, thank you. I look forward to next time.
Sure, man. This was just getting good, man. I was about to get into, you know what I mean?
No, we will next time. Save it, brother. Surprise me. We'll get into it. I love the surprise. And those are good questions, brother. I love it, and thank you. And I do want to come on here again, brother. Absolutely.
Está bueno, man.
All right, brother.
All right, man. Have a good night, brother.
Free Aztlan, brother. Absolutely.
That's what's up, man.